My phone vibrated in my pocket as I stopped in front of the door of my house. Tired after a hard day, I wasn't even going to answer it, but something made me pull it out and look at the screen. A message. An anonymous number. I opened it, and immediately felt something cold and unpleasant burn my back. She's lying to you. She's not who she seems. I froze, rereading these words several times. No greeting, no explanation. Just this short but extremely disturbing text. I looked around, as if looking for someone who could have sent it. But there was nothing. The street was quiet, as usual. Cars were lined up along the road, and children's laughter could be heard from a neighboring house. Nothing suspicious. My heart beat faster. Who were they? And, most importantly, what are they talking about? I took a deep breath, forced myself to calm down, and put my phone back in my pocket. It could be a joke. A bad attempt by someone to play a trick on me. I pushed those thoughts aside, put the key in the lock, and walked into the house. Honey, are you home? I heard from the kitchen, Kate's voice, soft and gentle as always. I walked into the living room, took off my jacket, and went to her. She was standing by the stove, stirring something in a pot, and smiled when I walked in. I looked at her, her big brown eyes, her perfect smile. She is not who she seems. Nonsense. I shook my head, trying to get those words out of my head. You're early today, she said, coming over and lightly touching my arm. Yes, I decided to finish work a little early. I hugged her, but I still felt anxious inside. That evening, I could not forget about that message. The next day, I told myself it didn't mean anything. But no matter how hard I tried, those words would not leave my mind. I looked through my phone for details. The number from which the message came was not saved in my contacts. I checked it on the internet. Nothing. An anonymous number that didn't give out any information. A week passed. I started to forget about the incident, convinced myself that it was a silly prank, and then something happened that I didn't expect. I came home earlier than usual. Usually, I would come home around 7, but that day a work meeting was cancelled, and I decided not to stay in the office. It was still light when I drove up to the house. I unlocked the door and went inside, about to call Kate, but something stopped me. Voices were coming from the living room. Men's laughter. I froze. My wife didn't know I was coming so early. And, apparently, she was not alone. I took a step toward the living room and saw them. Kate was sitting on the couch, and a young man was sitting across from her. He looked too comfortable, too relaxed. My wife was saying something and he was laughing. They didn't even notice me at first. My heart thudded somewhere in my chest. Kate, she looked up, her eyes widening for a moment. Oh, you're home, early. I looked over at the boy. He looked familiar. Very familiar. But I couldn't remember where I knew him from. He didn't say anything. He just looked at me, but I had a bad feeling inside me. Something was wrong. I could feel it from the moment I saw Kate on the couch next to this guy. My wife was so calm, so poised, as if she wasn't embarrassed at all that I had caught her with another man in our home, and he just sat there and was silent. His eyes looked at me as if he was trying to say something but was afraid. I took a step forward, looking closely at his face. I had seen him somewhere. A long time ago. Alex, this is Oliver, Kate said, too easily, too carefree. I almost swayed. Jack's son. My heart clenched. Jack had died 5 years ago. He was my friend. A good man. His death was ruled an accident, although I always had my doubts, and now his son was sitting in my living room next to my wife. Oliver. I looked at him carefully. He nodded but said nothing. His hands were nervously clenched into fists. We were just talking. Kate continued. tossing her hair behind her back. He was passing by and decided to come in, to remember his father. I didn't believe a word she said. There was something wrong with her. Yeah, I just wanted to know more about him, Oliver finally said, but his voice sounded uncertain, his eyes said otherwise. Kate quickly changed the subject and started talking about dinner, some new dish she wanted to try. I didn't listen. I just watched Oliver. His shoulders were tense. He could not look me directly in the eye. When he finally left, I was left alone with my wife. Why didn't you tell me he was coming? I asked. Alex, what's wrong with you? She pretended to laugh. It's just your friend's son. I didn't say anything. I just went to the bedroom and closed the door behind me. I sat on the bed, staring at my phone. I had the feeling that this message and his visit were connected. She's lying to you. She's not who she seems to be. The next morning I got up earlier than usual. I wasn't a person who gave in to jealousy easily. But now something in me changed. I needed to know the truth. I installed an app that allowed me to connect to home surveillance cameras. We had installed them a few years ago after a robbery in the neighboring house. Kate was always complaining that they were breaking the atmosphere, so I rarely checked them, but today I made an exception. I opened the latest recordings, I scrolled back through the videos, I saw Oliver appearing outside our house. I saw Kate walk out to him. Glancing over her shoulder as if to make sure no one was there, they were talking. Their faces were serious. She touched his arm, he looked away, looking nervous, then she led him inside. I rewound the tape. This was not the first time he came. Every time, when I wasn't home, every time she was sure I wouldn't see it, I felt my hands clench into fists. My gaze settled on Kate, and in that moment I realized that everything I knew about her could be a lie. My suspicions left no room for doubt. I couldn't think of anything else. The footage from the cameras was playing in my head, repeating over and over again like a stuck record. Kate and Oliver. The way they looked at each other. The way she touched him. The way he dodged her hands, but at the same time didn't leave. I sat in my office, staring at the monitor, watching the new footage. I started watching everything the cameras had captured recently. I pulled up the archive files. Every night I was on a business trip, every trip, and that's when I saw it. Kate wasn't just with Oliver, she was seeing other people. I couldn't believe my eyes. New men appeared on the screen, men I had never seen before. Some came into our house and stayed for several hours. Some would just drive up and she would get into their car. I started to feel my heart pounding in my chest, my breathing became labored. I knew I couldn't just let it go. I opened my phone and checked her messages. But she knew how to cover her tracks. There was nothing suspicious. Everything looked perfectly clean, but then I remembered something important. We had another camera in the office. It was recording sound. I opened its recordings and started listening. Voices. Laughter. Quiet conversations that made me clench my teeth so hard it hurt. Doesn't he suspect anything? No, Alex is as naive as ever. He's too trusting. My brain felt like it exploded. It was Kate's voice. I replayed the tape again. Oliver. He didn't say anything either. No, he's scared. He'll stay quiet. I know how to control him. I leaned back in my chair. My fingers were trembling. This was not just a betrayal, she was manipulating them. Kate was keeping them silent. She was using them. I suddenly realized I was living with someone I didn't know. I looked at our wedding photo on the shelf. Kate was smiling. She was so beautiful that day, but now that I looked at the photo, it seemed to me that her smile was a mockery. I grabbed the frame and threw it at the wall. The glass shattered into small pieces, but this did not bring me relief. I had to find out more. I had to find out the truth to the end. I couldn't let go of the feeling that Kate was not just an unfaithful wife. She was something much worse. I sat in the darkness of my room, staring at the wall, my thoughts whirling like a storm. I remembered everything. All the little things. All the hints I had ignored before, and then, like a bolt of lightning in the middle of the night, a memory struck me. Jack. He was my best friend. He died 5 years ago. Was it an accident? Or not? I got up and walked around the room, trying to remember the last conversation I had with him. It was the day before he died. We were sitting in a bar. Jack looked restless. He was drinking more than usual. His eyes were constantly darting around. As if he was afraid that someone would overhear, and then he said this phrase, "Alex, I should have told you earlier. She's not what she seems." I didn't think much of it at the time, and the next day he was dead. The police called it an accident. He allegedly fell from the balcony of his apartment. But I never understood how it happened. Jack was not someone who would accidentally stumble. He was careful. He was strong. He didn't drink enough to lose control, but I accepted it. I accepted the official version, and now, I pulled up all the materials about his death again, the police report. Testimonies. Photos from the scene, and then I noticed something. Kate was there. I looked at the photo taken at the scene. The police had cordoned off the area and put up tape. People from the neighboring apartments came out to watch, and among the crowd was Kate. I had never seen this before. She was standing aside. Her face was so calm. I immediately went to her. When I walked into the living room, she was sitting on the couch with her phone in her hand, as if nothing had happened. "Kate," she looked up. "What's wrong?" I went closer, pulled out my phone and showed her the photo. "You were there." She shrugged her shoulders. "So what?" "I was just passing by then, just passing by the place where my best friend died." She stopped talking. Her eyes changed. "Do you suspect something?" Her voice was cold. I tried to control myself. "He told me something before he died. He warned me about you." Kate looked at me, and then, she smiled. It wasn't just any smile, it was the smile of someone who knows something you don't. "Alex, you are so naive." I felt cold. I suddenly realized that she wasn't denying it. She wasn't denying it. She was just playing with me. I felt my mind shattering like a piece of glass. Kate could have killed Jack. I couldn't trust her anymore. I couldn't be around her anymore. I had to find out the truth before it was too late. Alex catches Oliver in an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town. Jack's son, who had been like a son to him before, showed no signs of his life being closely intertwined with the dark threads Kate held in her hands. Now that all the cards have been revealed, Oliver confesses what seemed impossible. "She betrayed you, Alex. She's been lying to you all along. Not just you. She's been lying to everyone around her," Oliver says, his voice trembling, but his eyes still showing traces of the terrible addiction he hasn't been able to overcome. Alex stands listening to him, silently. He doesn't believe it, but he can't deny it either. He begins to recall how often his wife stayed home alone, how long she tried to brush off his suspicions. He remembers small details that seemed insignificant, but now they turn into big cracks in his understanding of everything that happened. "She manipulated your friend, my father, Jack. And I was just part of her plan. I didn't want to, but she made me. I couldn't tell the truth." "You couldn't believe your wife would get this far, could you?" Oliver lowers his head. "She knew about my family, she knew my weaknesses. You know, Alex, how she could put pressure on people. She knew everything about me, about my parents, and she knew how to make me a powerless puppet in her hands. She did it all because of me." Alex cannot resist the shock. He feels the shock and disappointment go deeper than any wound he could have received while working for the police. Kate, his wife, the woman he loved and trusted, was far more dangerous than he could have ever imagined. I didn't want to lie to you, but I had no choice, Alex. She threatened my family. She forced me to sleep with her when I didn't want to. She knew I couldn't take it, that I would give up everything. And I did what she wanted me to do to save my family, but she had already started to consume everything around her. She killed Jack, Alex. She killed him. These words sound like an icy stream. Alex can't believe it. Jack, his best friend, the one he promised to protect from all dangers, was killed by Kate. She made Oliver keep silent, made him be her accomplice in the crime, in the death of the man Alex loved so much. She told him that if he revealed the truth, she would destroy his family, his everything. And he was scared. He couldn't bring himself to tell you. And then, when he decided to tell you, she made his death look like an accident. Like an ordinary case that no one would investigate. Alex looks at Oliver, the guy he grew up with like a brother. He can't believe it's true. Oliver was not the enemy. He was part of this terrible game that Kate was playing, and I don't even know if it was my fault or if I was just locked into her world. But she made me do it. She made me betray you without even admitting it to myself. And now that it's all come out, I can't be a part of it anymore. I can't live with what I did anymore. Alex stands there, not knowing what he is feeling. Anger, sadness, anger, and a huge emptiness overwhelm him, as if he were on the very edge of a precipice. Kate, his beloved wife, his partner, has turned out to be a monster who has been manipulating him and his friend all along. And now that he realizes this, he doesn't know where to go from here. His entire reality has fallen apart. You had to know it wasn't just a betrayal, Oliver adds quietly. It was a game. And you were part of it, but you didn't even realize it. I didn't sleep for the second night in a row. My head was heavy as lead. Thoughts were mixed into chaos, making it impossible to find a way out. But one thing was clear, Jack did not die by accident. Kate was hiding something. I was sitting in my car, parked in front of the bar where Oliver often went. The guy I'd known since I was a kid. The guy who was now sleeping with my wife. No, he wasn't just sleeping with her. He was under her control, I could see it. I saw fear in his eyes. Not passion, not love, but fear. What had she done to him? The rain pounded on the roof of the car. Moisture poured over the windshield, smearing the light of the streetlights. I glanced nervously at the door of the bar. Finally, Oliver came out. His gait was heavy, his back hunched. He looked like he was carrying the whole world on his shoulders. I got out of the car and before he could react, I grabbed him by the shoulders and pulled him into a dark alley between buildings. Alex. What are you? I pushed him against the wall, resting my hands on the bricks on either side of his head. Talk to me. Oliver went pale. What, about Kate? Everything you know. The guy panicked. He looked around as if he was afraid someone would hear us. I grabbed him by the collar and pushed him back. Was she involved in my friend's death? His eyes widened. You don't understand, then explain it to me. Oliver closed his eyes. I could feel him trembling, and then he spoke. She controls me. She knows everything about me. She knows what I do, where I go. She threatened me. If I try to disappear, she will destroy me. I looked at him, not believing my ears. What is she holding you with? He took a breath. My father. Jack. He found out the truth. His heart sank. What truth? Oliver gave me a look that scared me. She killed him. I took a step back. What? He knew something about her. He knew she was manipulating you, that she was using people. He tried to tell you, but she beat him to it. I grabbed his collar again. Why didn't you tell me this before? Oliver's eyes filled with tears. Because she made me keep quiet. His voice broke. She said if I ever said a word to you, she'd do the same to me. The rain merged with his tears. I let go of him and took a step back. My heart was pounding in my chest, as if it would burst out. Kate killed Jack, and I hadn't seen anything. Oliver was shaking. You have no idea how dangerous she is. She was never who you thought she was. I clenched my fists. I won't let her manipulate you or me anymore. I turned and walked away. There was a reckoning ahead. I couldn't believe what I had learned. My entire reality began to crack at the seams like an old mirror. Oliver had told me the truth, but that was only the beginning. It was just a window into a dark world that I didn't want to be in. I sat in the car, swallowing hard. I couldn't shake this feeling of fear and anger that gripped me. I was no longer the one who lived carefree in my little world. I could no longer be naive. Kate was not just a traitor. She was a creature capable of manipulating everyone around her to achieve her goals. And it wasn't just a game. I didn't have enough time to think about it all, but I knew my goal was clear: to stop her before it was too late. The next morning I met with Oliver again. We decided that we would no longer secretly hide in Kate's shadow. This could not go on. He told me more details, and with each new story my anger grew. Oliver told me how Kate kept him under control by exploiting his greatest fears. She knew about his weaknesses, his family problems, the debts he had accumulated after his father's death. She knew that he had no other choice, and she forced him to do her bidding. She knew how to keep me silent, Oliver said. She insidiously exploited my fears and weaknesses. She knew I couldn't lose everything I had left. She did everything she could to keep me under her control. I could not believe it. I watched him, trying to understand how this woman could keep people captive to her manipulations. It wasn't just blackmail. It was a real mind game in which everyone was walking on a knife's edge. Oliver continued. Kate knew I was afraid of losing everything that mattered. She knew that the most important thing for me was to leave at least some part of myself, at least some hope for the future. And she made me do it. I couldn't help but ask. How could you let this happen? How could you stay with her when all this was so obvious? Oliver lowered his head. He was silent. Then he answered quietly, because I was afraid. Because if I left her, she would destroy me. She left me no choice. She made it so that I was forced to stay with her. I was afraid that she could do something even worse than I could imagine, and that's when I realized. He was not just a victim. He was part of her game. But you didn't have to be silent, I said. You could have told me the truth before. Oliver looked at me, and there was something in his eyes that I couldn't understand: pain, shame, and anger all at once. I know. He whispered, I know. But I couldn't. She forced me to be silent. She forced me not only with words, but also with threats. I was afraid for myself and my family. I could feel the anger bursting inside me. How did she make him keep silent? I felt like I needed to understand more. If she was keeping Oliver under control, could she be manipulating other people in his life as well? What else was she hiding? What else was going on? I want you to tell me the truth, I said. You have no choice now. You have to tell me everything. I'll respect you more if you tell me how it happened. Oliver tilted his head back, closed his eyes, and took a deep breath. It was as if he was trying to release everything that had been pent up inside. And he said, I don't know how it happened. But I knew that Kate was capable of doing anything to get what she wanted. And that was scary. She made me think that I had no right to my own will. She was playing with all of us, manipulating us, using us as pawns on her board. And I became a part of her game. I turned to him, not knowing what to say. My angry reaction was interrupted by an inner feeling that I was partly to blame. Perhaps I, too, had allowed her to control my life without realizing it. I stood before him, knowing that this was not the end. It was just the beginning. The beginning of what I had to do to stop Kate before she destroyed us all. You've taken the first step, I said. Now we're going to end this together. We're going to uncover her secrets. Oliver looked at me, and I saw a flash of hope in his eyes. He was no longer who he was before. He had become part of me, part of this fight. We were no longer two victims. We were those who were going to the end. And we would find a way to stop her. I felt as if I was standing on the edge of a cliff, and everything around me started to fall apart. My eyes were drawn to one thought, and I couldn't let go of it. If Kate was so skillful at manipulating Oliver, how could I be sure I wasn't her victim? Wasn't it all part of her big game, where Oliver and I, and maybe everyone else, were just pieces on her chessboard? The feeling that my life was just a series of manipulations became unbearable. I started looking for answers in every detail, in every moment that now seemed important. And although I already had many doubts, I still couldn't believe that the woman I loved was so sinister. I felt like I was in some kind of nightmare, and the more I dug, the darker the reality became. One evening, when I decided to dive into research again, I found her diary. It was a moment that changed everything. It was hidden in one of her favorite places. An old book that seemed to be an unquestionable part of our home. I broke out in a cold sweat when I opened the first page, and with each line my mind was shattered. Kate was not just a woman who cheated on her husband. She was more than just a cheater. She was a manipulator at the highest level, and her tricks went much deeper than I could have imagined. I kept reading, and every word gave me more horrifying insights. Kate wrote about how she manipulated everyone she met, including me. She wrote about her plans, how to control every situation, how to outwit everyone around her and leave them in her hands. And most frighteningly, she described Jack's death in detail. I felt my heart start to beat faster as I read the next part. I can't hold it in anymore. He was too close, too great to just leave him as he was. A few years ago, I decided that Jack would no longer be a part of my life. He knew too much. He knew that I would always be on top. And when I realized that Jack was starting to question my actions more and more, I made him step aside. It was just a step towards getting rid of him. He was not only my friend, he was a dangerous element to my plans. So when he found out the truth, I forced him to keep silent. I exploited his weaknesses, his worries, and eventually made him leave. So I decided that his death should look like an accident. It was just the best decision for all of us. These words knocked all the strength out of me. I simply could not believe that Kate was capable of such a thing. And everything I had built with her disappeared in an instant, like a mirror shattering into 1,000 pieces. My soul was broken by this discovery. I was sitting in an empty house, where just a few days ago everything was different. I felt betrayed not only by Kate, but by everyone who was in her game. I knew that I couldn't let this go now. I had no more doubts. I could see that Kate was not just an ordinary woman. She was a master manipulator who used her family, friends, and even people she considered enemies to get what she wanted. I was no longer someone who mindlessly trusted every word, who lived in my own little world. I became a part of her hellish game. I was no longer just a man looking for answers about betrayal. Now I was a man who had to stop this woman, no matter what. My thoughts were focused on only one thing: finding a way to end her plans and stop her before it was too late. All my energies were focused on exposing her, but even now that I realized the truth, it wasn't that easy. She was still cunning, still dangerous, but it was not the end. It was only the beginning of my struggle. I realized that in order to complete it all, I would have to go all the way and fight to the end. I had no other choice. If I let her go free, she would destroy not only me, but everyone who fell into her network. I raised my head and decided, I will not give up. I will fight. And if I have to, I will come out of this fight a winner. But to do that, I would have to do everything I could to stop Kate. For the next few days, I couldn't get out of this state where everything was permeated with only one thought: I had to stop Kate. I was no longer the man she had once manipulated. All these years I thought we were living together, that we were a couple. But now that I had discovered all this, I realized that it was just an illusion she had created for me. I had become just a part of her plan, a part of her game, which sooner or later had to end in disaster. But I could no longer be her pawn. I had to take the last step, and this step had to be decisive. My heart felt like a worst nightmare. I couldn't sleep, I couldn't eat. I had one goal: to end this once and for all. I knew that Kate was preparing for something, and if I didn't make it in time, everything would go to hell. She was cunning, and that was the worst part. She was not what I imagined her to be, not an ordinary woman. She was like a predator hiding in the shadows, and I was her next victim. That's when I decided to act. First, I went to the police. All these months I had been collecting evidence, notes, phone calls, messages, even testimonies from those who could see her manipulations. I knew that in order to win, I had to make her fall into her own trap. I felt fear coursing through my veins every time I thought about her plans. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that I couldn't do anything without her confession. I had to get her to admit that she was responsible for all the manipulations, that she was the one who killed Jack. And although I felt I had no right to do so, I decided to take the risk anyway. One question remained: how could I detain her when she already knew I was hunting her? How could I be sure that she wouldn't run away, hide, or play another evil game? I knew that this step had to be the last one. I had to settle everything with her once and for all. And so, when the moment came, and I went to the house, my only thought was to finish it. This time she had no chance. I walked to the house where we once lived together and felt my heart beating faster and faster. It was no longer just a house. It was the center of all my painful memories, my failures and mistakes, the place where it all began and where it was supposed to end. I felt that I could no longer stand still. I was going forward, and there was no other way back. When I got to the door, I knew that my presence was already tangible to her. I could hear her moving through the rooms, her footsteps on the old parquet floors that still remembered our first meetings, our laughs, our promises. Everything that had once mattered was now just a part of this dramatic performance, where I became the hero, but also its victim. I knew that every movement, every look could be fatal, and so I entered the house. I saw her. She was standing in front of me, as usual, so familiar, but not the same. I saw her eyes change, the warm smile I had once loved disappeared. Instead, there was only a cold emptiness. And then she reached for the knife she always carried with her, part of her power. Part of her manipulation. She was ready for the last battle. "You can't do it, Alex," she said coldly, her voice calm, even a little ominous. "You can't stop me." You will never stop me. I couldn't say a word. My hand was already on the gun I always carried with me, ready for her to really attack. She lunged at me with the knife, and that was what I expected, but even then I wasn't ready for it. I deflected the blow, and her hand with the knife bounced back. She tried again, but I was faster. Using all my strength, I pushed her, and she lost her balance, falling backwards. This was the fatal moment. Her body, as she had planned, fell from the roof, leaving only emptiness behind. I didn't feel any relief. My victory was hollow, and I realized that I would not find peace in her death. Now I stood on the threshold of what had once been my home and felt my soul torn by loss. I had nothing left. Kate was dead, her illusions, her manipulations, all of it was destroyed. But this did not bring me relief. I just stood there, contemplating the empty roof that had now become the grave of my dreams. The warmth of the evening, which used to bring me peace, no longer gave me any comfort. She was dead, and I realized that everything was much more complicated than I could have imagined. Now that I was looking at it all, I couldn't let go of the feeling that the real test was yet to come. And although I had destroyed her game, it didn't mean I had found peace. When the last sound of her falling body faded into the depths, I couldn't believe it was over. Kate could no longer manipulate me. She could no longer create her illusions. And yet, even with her death, I didn't feel the relief that seemed to be coming. The warmth of the evening, which used to bring me at least a little peace, was now just a dead noise reminding me of what had happened. I remained standing on the doorstep, looking at the empty roof, wondering if it was really over. Those who find themselves in such situations often say that the moment when you feel yourself being let go is important. But I didn't feel that. I felt only emptiness. Emptiness that came instead of anger, instead of release. Emptiness that filled every cell in my body. I went to the police, because I couldn't let all this go unexplained. They knew why I was here, and they had seen all the evidence I had collected. But even when they arrived, I couldn't feel like a hero, even after I had revealed the whole nightmare. She was no longer my woman. No longer a part of my life. But was I a real winner? Or was I just a victim of my own insecurities and mistakes? I told them everything I knew. I didn't hide anything. I showed them every part of the story, from how she had manipulated me, my friend Jack, and even Oliver, to the evidence of her betrayals and manipulations. I remained calm, even though my emotions were raging inside me. She had paid for everything she had done, and I watched as her body was removed from the scene. They took her away, and I was left alone. But even that didn't come as a relief. Now I was standing on the threshold of what had once been my home, feeling every step taking me further away from who I was. My soul was heavy, full of sadness, with no relief, no way to go back. I knew that nothing would be the same as before. Everything that once seemed important was now just a vain memory. My life was no longer mine. I was left with an empty heart that could not find peace. Oliver, the son of my late friend, decided to leave the city. He had no more strength to be here, where all this had happened. It was hard to understand what he was going to do now. His life became part of this horrible scenario. He left everything, leaving only bitter memories of everything that happened and how he was forced to be part of this manipulation. He left, but left no hope that he would ever be able to return to a normal life. I stood there and watched his car disappear into the fog into which he was sinking with his memories. And I knew he would not come back. He would not want to return to this place where everything ended so painfully. And maybe he was right to do so. Because that place had nothing for him anymore. And, to be honest, I didn't know if I had anything left that was worth saving. my home, my family, my history, all of it was now empty. She was dead, and it didn't bring me any relief. Oliver had left, and his decision to leave this place was logical. I was left alone, with thoughts spinning in my head at breakneck speed. Was everything I had done right? Or could I have done something else? Was there any other way to stop it before it became this? It's hard to say. It's hard to come to any answer. Because even if I did find some form of justice, it did not bring me inner peace. I remained a survivor of a catastrophe, but without any hope of fixing what had happened. I could not turn back time. And I could not get back the part of me that I had lost with her. Life went on, but I was not the same. Nothing would bring me back to the time when everything was perfect. But life goes on, and maybe one day I will be able to build something new again. But today it was impossible. Now, as I stood in front of the empty house, I realized that there would be nothing more. And in this emptiness, I was alone. It was the end. The end of my story, the end of my life, which had become part of that terrible labyrinth I had built with her. And although I was no longer a part of her game, it was still hard to find any comfort in what had happened.